Hello to my friends, family, and audience in India, America, and abroad. This is Sunny Sharma back with his podcast, India Inside with Sunny Sharma, and his YouTube video, Sunny Sharma at India Inside Movement. Today I'm doing my concluding part two on covering the 45 documents from a book called The Movements of the New Left. The title is The Movements of the New Left, 1950 to 1975. Essential Documents Part 2, and here let's get started. Another radical spiritual leader, Daniel Berrigan, a Jesuit priest, respected poet, and pacifist, who joined the notable historian Howard Zinn in accompanying U.S. prisoners of war home after being released by the North Vietnamese, talks about the implications of the Vietnam War on the poor. In saying that the war is coming home to us, he relates in his 1968 book, Night Flight to Hanoi, quote, its inmost meaning strikes the American ghettos. One war, one crime against the poor, waged largely by the poor in servitude to the affluent. We resist and protest this crime. In referencing Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign, the quelling of dissent by the military, and new technology to counter outbreaks across America, he questions whether America is living up to true spiritual values. A tremendously important leaflet known as The Politics of Strike was issued by Berkeley's Third World Liberation Front during wide-scale advocacy and support for ethnic studies programs representing Global South identities. This involved strikes led by the Asian American Political Association, which was the first Asian students group founded by the student body at San Francisco State University. It was quite evident that in the 4-year gap between 1964 and 1968, quote, student politics had moved to the left. In 1964, Berkeley students had led the nationwide fight for student rights with the free speech movement. Only 4 years later, newly admitted students of color insisted that their struggle was linked to a worldwide anti-imperialist revolution. These students recognized, like Malcolm X, that no institution relinquishes rights without a struggle in their goal to fight for new educational opportunity in what they described as an inherently racist society. The principle of the right to self-determination was not only to dictate terms of choice and existence in education and work, but was foundational to smashing racism and, quote, through revolutionary struggle against the system itself. 1968 was a significant moment and watershed year in more ways than one. Mike Klonsky, the National Secretary of the Students for a Democratic Society in 1968, recognized along with other students that the Vietnam War was fundamentally imperialist and racist. What is most notable of his growing ideology is that, quote, increasingly, SDS leadership identified with the Black Panthers and the Third World, calling themselves revolutionary communists and emulating leaders like China's Mao Zedong, Cuba's Fidel Castro, and Vietnam's Ho Chi Minh. One of Klonsky's striking insights, a part of his national program of action, which sought to build a powerful youth movement, was that some of us should move into factories and shops as well as into working-class communities to better understand the material oppression of industrial workers, as well as to eradicate prejudices against workers, end quote. Making an inclusive movement with trust was foundational to building a powerful community, which, when called upon, can organize for change amidst the second reconstruction that was occurring in society during those tumultuous times, the late 1960s. Francis Beale led the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee's Black Women's Liberation Committee, formed in 1968, which later was expanded and was renamed to the title the Third World Women's Alliance, TWWA. This new organization focused more on race and class, particularly for Black women, in order to achieve liberation for all people. Years later, in the 1970s, the National Black Feminist Organization and the Combahee River Collective were formed as well, taking some inspiration from previous organizations and feminist academics. The TWWA believed only true revolution, not reform, could transform the status of women that had been traditionally seen as subjugated or supportive to men. The Puerto Rico revolutionary group, the Young Lords Party, YLP, developed a 1969 13-point program and platform, as well as community organization very similar to that of the Black Panther Party, formed before them in the 1960s. The revolutionary direction of the organization, as well as its weakness, was demonstrated by the fact that after 1972, the YLP merged into the new communist movement, becoming the Puerto Rican Revolutionary Workers Organization, and declined rapidly. Their demand for a socialist society where all people's basic needs would be serviced by community and the government involved the ideals of land being owned collectively by every person, the liberation of all political prisoners and prisoners of war, and the full realization of a global community by remembering the legacy of true revolutionaries like Che Guevara. The radicalness of the California Bay Area was evident back then as it was today, seen when students from around California in 1969 formed the Mecca. The I don't know how to pronounce that, but it's called in English Chicano Student Movement of Aztlan, an organization that advocated ancestral communalism, which denoted in the El Plan de Santa Barbara manifesto that Chicanismo simply embodies an ancient truth that man is never closer to his true self as when he is close to his community. We recognize that without a strategic use of education, an education that places value on what we value, we will not realize our destiny. It wasn't just important that education was centered on the historical and social context of individuals' cultural lifestyle so they achieve their potential. There also must be a shift in some of the corrosive value systems of Western society, particularly the materialism that Dr. King and other New Left organizers railed against. Quote, the ethic of profit and competition, of greed and intolerance, which the Anglo society offers, must be replaced by our ancestral communalism and love for beauty and justice. The November 1969 Indians of All Tribes Proclamation articulated the goals of a coalition of veteran activists and students attending the new Native American Studies program at San Francisco University in Berkeley, who took over the unused federal prison on Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay. A diversity of people, including whites, not only supported this endeavor, the eventual occupation of the island, which fell apart, sparked an American Indian cultural renaissance. Particularly notable is the demand that a, quote, museum will show the noble and tragic events of Indian history, including the broken treaties, the documentary of the Trails of Tears, the massacre of Wounded Knee, as well as the victory over Yellow Hair Custer and his army. An eye-opening document called On the Record of Police Actions Against the Black Panther Party press release showed that the press release from the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, the major national organization defending constitutional freedoms, reported that there was a clear pattern of harassment, infiltration, and entrapment regarding the Black Panther Party. This report shows clear patterns to undermine radical groups through heightened law enforcement techniques that led to escalated violent confrontations with police. Kathy Sarachild was a founding member of the New York Radical Women who later formed the Radical Feminists. She was one of the principal authors of a widely circulated guide to understand the theoretical analysis of women's oppression called Outline of Consciousness Raising, which appeared in the influential anthology Sisterhood is Powerful in 1970. One interesting theoretical self-reflection in the outline involved, quote, analyzing whatever privileges we have, white skin, education, class, etc., and see how these help perpetuate our oppression and that of others. Such clear awareness was instrumental in breaking down cultural barriers between diverse groups of people in America during a time of wide-scale social bigotry and stigma. Bella Abzug, in testimony before the New York City Human Rights Commission, recognized the truism that the progress of women in a particular society indicates the progress of that society as a whole, shown through her declaration that, quote, and along the way, they will find many allies among men and political organizations who recognize that a society which, at long last, gives full scope to the abilities and creativity of half its population can only gain in health, wisdom, and strength. Another revealing document is the Vietnam Veterans Against the War testimony to the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee by John Kerry, who testified on April 22, 1971. His famous and enduring question that has never been effectively answered, Quote, "How do you ask a man to be the last man to die for a mistake?" Not only was the war a costly miscalculation by the US government, it endangered the lives of poor Vietnamese while being especially damaging to American veterans who returned, disillusioned by an unwarranted conflict that truly has no end because of the endless rationalizations that communism was a true enemy against some supposed immaculate liberty. Goss provides the context for a meeting of rising black leaders that, quote, "a tangible measure of black power was a sweeping increase in African Americans being elected to office." This was demonstrated through Representative Charles Digg Jr. of Detroit, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, who gave a wonderful speech on June 18, 1971, at the event, highlighting one of the high points in black electoral thought, creativity, and black power in American history in the early 1970s. He gives a rousing affirmation of the need to remember the legacy of the Black struggle for liberation, including naming the Black luminaries who set the foundation for the Black electoral power that was achieved as a consequence of organization and the Great Society legislation that produced the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Diggs relates this historical legacy, saying, "We are grateful heirs of Douglass, Du Bois, and Bethune, of Medgar Evers, Malcolm, Martin Luther King, and Whitney Young. We build on the labors of Thurgood Marshall, Adam Clayton Powell, Roy Wilkins, the young men and women of the Civil Rights Movement of the 60s, and the Black thrust towards long-denied power and liberation, which is a part of the worldwide revolution of color and the rejection of caste." This second to the last document highlights the centrality of the civil rights struggle that focused on the achievement of full rights for blacks, but is also part and parcel of the wider movement to free all people. In many ways, though neoliberalism had been on the rise for several decades, leading to many moderate liberal leaders, this 1971 Black Caucus Coalition event marks the closing of one chapter and the beginning of another, not just for blacks, but all Americans seeking new horizons in a new technologically globalized economy. In many ways, this Black coalition foreshadowed future coalitions that elected such luminaries as the mayor of Chicago, Harold Washington, the Rainbow Coalition figure President Barack Obama, and others. It must be noted that the political framework, platform, and strategy of President Obama was in many ways inspired by the rhetoric of the civil rights movement, while also setting the blueprint for future elected officials, especially rising young leaders. Rounding out the two-part examination of the 45 documents, I decided to end with the last document in the book called Our Bodies, Ourselves, a book that sold 30 million copies over 30 years, compiled from a free workshop and a series of pamphlets on women's health created by the Boston Women's Health Book Collective. Goss provides a description on how the book was formed, particularly the new educational approach that in many ways mirrored that of academics like Paulo Freire, as shown through the excerpt describing, "We found we could discuss, question, and argue with each other in a new spirit of cooperation rather than competition. We had something to say, but we had a lot to learn as well. We did not want a traditional teacher-student relationship. This was the essence of a well-functioning society, a capitalist society that provides real choices, a socialist economy where people are empowered to make decisions for themselves, a society where traditional hierarchies are undermined in favor of empowering young people/students to seize the future, and the realization of the beloved community where cooperation is a reality in resolving conflicts with limited economic exploitation." So that's the end of my three-part series: the introduction, part one on the 45 essential documents, and part two concluding my examination of the 45 documents from the New Left period, 1950 to 1975. And what is clear from this time period is that America was at the height of its organized power. People, and not only that, but people were thinking very deeply about many things, from workers' rights, from education, pedagogy, from the anti-war movement, which would influence future anti-war movements in American history. So overall, there was a lot of organizing being done. There was a lot of serious intellectual considerations being made. And there was a wide-scale movement of liberation for all people, which was really centered on the imperative of citizenship. Not just what rights, privileges, and opportunities we have, but by what level will we have inclusivity, belonging, and acceptance, which will translate into a better, beloved community for all people in America and around the world. And we still are struggling and battling and wrestling with these questions today. So I thank you for listening to my three-part series. And I will see what I want to do in the future. Perhaps I will look into another book which I read called Why America Needs a Left. It describes the three leftist movements in American history, particularly abolitionism, the coalition by FDR, and the New Left movement, which I discussed. I think in the future, I think I am planning on doing a future podcast on that as well. So I thank you for listening, and I'll be back with another podcast. All right, bye.